Hi, everybody. Thanks for bearing with us on that little tech stuff. Welcome to San Diego Design Week and to our roundtable discussion on DEI in design. My name is Alexi. I'm today's moderator and a director of project management at Blink UX, based here in San Diego. Today, we'll discuss how Blink incorporates diversity, equity, and inclusion into its design practice and how you can elevate DEI in your own processes. Why is DEI an essential part of design? Well, you may have heard the expression, nothing for us without us. And in order to design the best products, we must consider perspectives from a diverse range of lived experiences. By broadening who we involve throughout the end-to-end process, we can create more durable, innovative, and inclusive designs. We'll start today's conversation first with the Land Acknowledgement. In preparing for this roundtable discussion that explores diversity, equity, and inclusion within our research and design practice, I find it necessary to recognize the land and original inhabitants where we conduct our practice here in San Diego. I therefore acknowledge the unceded land of the Kumeyaay peoples. I ask you to join me in acknowledging this land as their ancestral home and extending gratitude to their ancestors, past, present, and future. One way to honor and support the indigenous peoples of this land is by making material gifts. You can make a donation and find out more on the websites listed on this slide. All right, let's get into it. So Blink UX is a design, research, and strategy firm based here in San Diego. We use evidence-driven design to create products that people use, love, and remember, and we've been doing it for just over 20 years. Though Blink has been in the UX business for a couple of decades, it's only been in the last several years that we've been focusing on DEI. In the summer of 2020, folks at Blink were moved by the protests and activism in support of Black Lives Matter. During an employee forum, we started talking about our individual and collective feelings and decided that while having a safe space to process was really important, we also wanted to do more than just talk. So our head of HR and chief culture officer, with support from our CEO, put together a dedicated space to do DEI work. The results of this was the formation of our DEI committee, which is composed of 4 subcommittees. We've got HR and hiring, education, community outreach, and project processes. One of our first efforts was to create what we called at the time an anti-racism roadmap. It was a document that outlined the things that we could do within our project delivery processes towards anti-racism. But since it was created by Blinkers who, beyond having a passion and strong interest in DEI, really had no formal training or expertise, we knew that we needed to bring in an expert to help guide us. And to that end, we needed to work with our leadership team. So we worked with our leadership team to get approval of our plan, and most importantly, to provide the budget for us to engage with the consultant in this space. We were fortunate enough to be connected with Sloan K. Fay through some folks within our network, and we engaged with her over the course of several months. On Sloan's recommendation, she told us that we needed to take a step back and first do our research, which is pretty much how we run all of our design projects at Blink. So it was a real light bulb moment for us when we realized that we needed to apply our own process to this internal work. She gave us a set of required readings, which we came together to discuss and synthesize. And we held a series of internal workshops, just like we would do on a client project. It was through these workshops that helped shape our vision and values, and we replaced our to-do list roadmap with a values-based racial equity framework. We came up with a vision to ensure our UCD practice champions racial equity and anti-racism for our clients, ourselves, and our users. To support this vision, a set of 6 principles that serve as guideposts for our work. We're still working on the framework and how we can bring those principles to life. We're still learning, reading, and iterating, just as with all good design. As one of my colleagues says, design is never done, it's just due. So that's a very high level, kind of quick snapshot of where we've been and where we are today with our DEI efforts within Blink. And I'd like to shift gears now and move into the discussion of the day. So with that, I'll hand it over to our wonderful Blinkers to introduce themselves. Kathy, you can kick us off.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time today. My name is Kathy Bond, and I'm a program manager based in Seattle.
Sorry, my dog is barking. Well, that is Henry. I am Tulsi. I'm a UX researcher based in Austin, Texas.
Hey everyone, I'm Elodie Kwan, she, her pronouns. I'm a UX designer based out of San Francisco.
Hey, hi, you're next.
I think she's muted.
Of course I'm muted. Sorry about that. Hi, everybody. My name is Neha Arora. I'm Director of Recruiting for all internal Blink. And I'm based out of the beautiful Pacific Northwest, that is Seattle, Washington.
Wonderful. All right, I'm going to get out of this screen share here so I can see everybody's faces there. And we can move into our roundtable discussion. So super excited to be talking with all of you wonderful Blinkers today. One of the things that I wanted to talk about first is, you know, in my intro, I talked about how we've only been doing this kind of work at Blink, specifically in the DEI space, for just over 2 years, since summer of 2020. And as such, we're constantly learning, growing, and really evolving both our practices and ways of thinking. So what I'd like to hear from you all is, what are some of the biggest challenges and learnings or lessons that you've experienced in doing this work? We'd love to hear from anybody. Don't be shy. Somebody's got to go first.
I can kick it off.
Yeah.
I think for me, since I joined the committee and subcommittee kind of in the middle, was how overwhelming it can be, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think the support and safe space that the committee, larger committee and the subcommittee creates really helped ease that anxiety of being overwhelmed. And, you know, as we all keep going through our process and learning from it, it's really taught all of us, I think, to pace ourselves and to really think about outcomes versus just a checklist of to-dos, and be really intentional and thoughtful about that and how we bring it forward.
Yeah, that's great. I think when you talked about being overwhelmed, certainly I can sympathize with that feeling. And when we first started, as I mentioned, we sort of, had this to do. It was a roadmap, and it had, I don't know, 50 things on it, and or something like that. Certainly dozens or tens of items. And if you look at a giant checklist like that, it certainly does feel overwhelming. Each one of those items could easily could represent months of work. And it's like, where do you start? How do you prioritize? And like, what is the point almost? So I love what you said about like thinking about the outcome rather than just like, we got to check a box. Does anybody else, do you sympathize with the feeling overwhelmed at times, or maybe not knowing where to start?
I'll let you go. I saw you.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on that. I think I think social problems are such big looming things that sometimes it can just feel so hard to get started. And just feeling like, how do you make a difference? And then I think also there was an additional feeling that, you know, there were so many companies that were putting out these statements in the summer of 2020. And so how do we make a lasting impact that isn't just reactionary to particular events? And Alexi, you mentioned this, you know, we started and we were looking at this big checklist and we were kind of going down this checklist. And when we finally brought in a consultant, we kind of turned that upside down and kind of rethought how to do it. But I think it was a big step to just take that first step and even making that checklist in the first place. And maybe that's not where we're at now, but it was that small first step that we really needed. And sometimes it's just taking that first step. It's like going to the gym. Like, you don't want to go to the gym, but like once you get to the gym, you like feel really good about being there. So I think that's something that I've been thinking about a lot.
That's an interesting analogy too, because actually that's totally true. You can feel great about going to the gym, but sometimes you also need a trainer to like check your form so you don't injure yourself, you know? So that's kind of like, actually that's a really good analogy, because I think we needed a consultant to help us take a step back, work on our form, if you will, so that we didn't do more harm than good. So I think there is potential for, especially like some of our, especially at the beginning, like Blink in general has historically been pretty white. I'll just be frank about it. And some of the members of our subcommittee, as I said, were well-intentioned and interested and passionate about DEI, but didn't have expertise, and all of us didn't necessarily have the lived experience. So I think there is a potential for doing harm or focusing on the wrong things. At the same time, if you don't do anything, like that's also harmful. So I think anyway, that I just liked that analogy a lot.
I want to piggyback off of that analogy because it is great. I think one way Sloan kind of helped us check our form was by getting us to actually sit and think about why we were doing this work and basically slow our pace down. And I remember when I joined the committee, I was like, oh, wow, we already have, I kind of similar to Kathy, I joined after we had come up with our initial draft of the roadmap. And it felt like we had so much to do. I just wanted to go. Like our typical pace of projects is like, well, you have this amount of time and, you know, you want to do as much as you can for the client in that amount of time. So it feels very like natural to want to jump into action. So almost being like forced to take that step back, I feel like was really like a great reminder for us to be like, it takes time to actually absorb and understand why we're even doing this work to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah, like certain things, certain ways that we're approaching this work are more like how we would work on engage on a client project. Like I said, sort of taking a step back, like at Blink, whether it's a design project or a research project, we'll typically have kind of a discovery phase where we're doing the background research and understanding the space. And so that aspect is definitely in line with how we're approaching this work, like a client project. The sort of like flip side though, or the way that it's different, is that we're not on a specific timeline. Like this can't be done in 5 weeks or 6 weeks. You know, this takes time, and it needs to. It's important enough that we need to give it the space that it needs. So,
and I think that all of this conversation so far reminds me of how, like, metaphorically, Sloan kind of smacked us in the face and really made us take that step back and be humble and like really, you know, Alexi, as you mentioned at the top, like educate ourselves and do that work first and be disciplined about it. And that was a huge aha, like, yeah, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I want to add to that, from a hiring perspective, one thing I've learned, as a recruiter, we have to kind of develop our own self-awareness in this space, because we have our biases, and as we're sourcing and finding candidates. So, just constantly asking questions and reading, and to see how we can better understand those biases and look beyond that. So just really continuing to educate ourselves and our hiring managers and our hiring committees to look beyond a candidate's profile, to dig deeper, and also not be reactionary in our hiring. It's really important to not just jump and to fill a role. I think it's important to do some research and educate ourselves, and create a standardized process to bring the right pipeline in place, and a diverse pipeline in place. So that's something that I'm constantly reminding myself and my team, and just continuing to educate our leaders here. So
yeah, the time it takes is important, whether it's doing this work in our projects, or like you said, for hiring, to make sure that we bring the right folks in. You also talked about, and I wanted to hear more about the unconscious bias, because or maybe you didn't use that term, maybe I'm saying that, but how does the recruiting team specifically, like, how are y'all working on dispelling unconscious or conscious bias within hiring? And I'm curious to hear also from others if y'all have seen that play out in your areas of expertise as well.
yeah, it's a really good question, Alexia. I think the first step that we took is really standardizing our hiring process. We are looking, we're looking at a set of requirements, and we're just playing off that, versus, profiles, and making sure that we're looking at all qualified candidates that are meeting those requirements. And then the other thing we're looking at, what are the different diversity platforms we can hire from, and reach out to different networks, because what happens is, we'll always go to this one network or platform called LinkedIn. I think everybody knows. We're looking beyond that, and we're having conversations, and so it's not just reaching out to the candidate, it's actually having a conversation with them and learning about their backgrounds, and how it might fit into Blink, and how might they add value to Blink, and how, so it doesn't just take one conversation, it takes multiple, and we're taking that information back to our hiring committees. So these are, there's just a lot of times we just look at somebody's profile online or their resume, and we immediately just in a very reactionary way say, oh, they might not be a fit because they don't have XXX, right? I think we're just looking beyond that, and we're making that extra call to have an informational session with that candidate. If they've reached out to us, or if there's something unique that we saw about them, we want to have that conversation. So
has that been a challenge though? Like, I'm sure folks in the working world have experienced a coworker leaving the company, and then everybody feels the stress of having one less coworker, and so like there can be a pressure to fill a role. So how have you balanced that need to fill out the team, but also wanting to give the time that it takes to find the right candidate?
I think it's really important that, we be transparent right in the beginning of the process, and we're all aligned with goals and objectives, and, sharing a timeline on when we want to fill this role by. But if we truly are seeking a diverse pipeline of candidates, we have to make sure that our hiring committee is moving along with us, and we know that we might not be able to fill this role right away. So, having these like upfront transparent conversations, like sharing timeline, standardizing the process, reaching out to our networks, it's a lot of like back and forth communication and conversation, But in the end, everybody does come around and seem to be aligned with the objectives and what they're looking for in filling the role.
Yeah.
So it's not just about, filling the role quickly, but yes, we do get that pushback, but, we make sure we educate our hiring team that why it's important to have a diverse pipeline of candidates when a position is open.
Yeah, and I think that is true, or that plays out in different ways throughout the process. So there's like hiring, you've seen that, and in terms of the time versus the value, like it might take a little bit more time to take a pause and look at the criteria, whether it's hiring criteria or research participant criteria. But if ultimately the outcome is a good result, I think people do see the value in that. I'm curious to hear from folks from design or research, like how have you seen, or how have you tried to fight unconscious bias or dispel biases in design or research practice?
Yeah, so from, I guess, the research side, one way unconscious bias could come up is including demographic information about participants in findings or demographics within personas. And a lot of times when that happens, like when you include certain information that might not necessarily actually map to your point, like the findings or what the persona is actually trying to accomplish, the audience, the client, whoever is taking a look at the report can basically fill in gaps based upon their previous understanding or their conceptions of that particular demographic. So one way a small way I try to dispel unconscious bias in research is basically really think about what information is absolutely essential to communicating a particular finding. Do I really need to include the gender of the participant when I'm describing what the person did? Do I really need to include a picture of the person's face on every single quote? I mean, of course, we include video clips just to help our audience build empathy for participants, but we might not necessarily need to put a person's face behind every single quote because you never quite know what they might take away from that information. When it comes to personas specifically, I know there's a lot of techniques and methods out there. One in particular is a class that I took by Indy Young, and she talks about a method called thinking styles, which really focuses on creating demographic-free personas. And it's basically all about focusing on people's reasoning, emotional reactions, guiding principles. And she talks a lot about why that's super important and techniques on how to focus on that and not focus on demographics.
Very cool. LD, have you seen this play out in design? Are there ways that you're trying to fight bias in your design practice?
Yeah, I think that's something that's always sort of top of mind for me, especially because we're such an evidence-driven design firm, and the information that we're basing some of our decisions on, they come from the folks that we've researched, and it's linked, the research and the design, right? If we don't have a very diverse set of voices in the research that we're doing, then those design decisions are going to reflect that. And I know that's something that we're working on here at Blink, and trying to diversify those voices and make sure that we're including a lot more diverse voices, a lot more unique voices, so that we're not just building for one particular demographic.
Interesting. Cool. One other thing I wanted to touch on today is this idea of embracing imperfection, which is one of our pillars within the racial equity framework. Embrace imperfection and humility, get comfortable being uncomfortable is the specific pillar. Why do you guys think it's important to embrace imperfection?
I can get started. I think my personal belief is that there shouldn't be a super big divide between like our personal lives and our professional lives. And I think that we are good at our jobs because we are humans. We're not just designers, we're not just researchers, we're not just project managers or recruiters. There's very human aspects to us that we bring into our work that make us good at our jobs. And I think, especially as a design firm where a lot of the roles we take on are consulting, and we're consulting companies and they're coming to us, there sometimes feels like this need to be the expert in the room. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned from this DEI experience is, it's okay to say you don't know. It's okay to admit that, like, you want to do a little bit more research, or that you're not an expert in something. And I think as we normalize that, and as we make more space for not knowing and wanting to know more, it sort of just continues to bring in that very human aspect of ourselves into the workplace. And we get to bring in more of our whole selves, which I think in general just lifts everyone and makes us better at what we do.
I think part of my role as a PM on a variety of projects, I'm working with a variety of different team members and clients. Something that I try to keep top of mind and create space for is making it feel like it's any moment we're together, a safe space to ask questions. Like, everyone should feel like they can voice their opinion, that they can voice questions in a way that, might challenge a design or a statement, or it only makes us better. And I think it helps us deliver even better outcomes for the client too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Lexi, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, one of the things that I on the like imperfection sort of tack is, in addition to what y'all have said already, is one of the readings that we did with our consultant, or that she recommended, was about white supremacy culture within organizations. And one of the, like, pillars, if you will, or things to look out for is perfectionism. And I think the sort of framing of it is, like, if you think of perfect as the enemy of the good, if we wait until, like, okay, we have learned everything we're going to learn, and we're like, we've mastered DEI, if you will, and so, like, then we're going to start doing this work because now we are experts and we know everything. If we wait until that point, well, that point is never going to come, and so then we will not do anything. So I think for me, one of the ways that I've been challenged is, as, like, I'm also a project manager, so I can kind of sometimes be a little bit of a perfectionist. It's like, well, if I can't do it perfectly, I don't want to do it at all. But and there is a balance, right? Because we don't want to, like, certainly we have to be careful of making mistakes that could potentially harm. But at the same time, again, if we wait for perfect, we're not going to do anything at all. So I think it sort of also helps to normalize making mistakes, because then we can own, what do we do to rectify that? What do we do to repair? How do we call in if we see a coworker that has done something, or if we have made a mistake, if we said something that we realized, you know what, I shouldn't have framed it that way, or I was wrong about X, Y, or Z. I think it helps to normalize that kind of, like, mistake making, because then you can figure out a framework for reparation and moving forward. Anyway, Neha, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to add, we always look for ways and how to make our recruiting process perfect, right? From A through Z. But what I've seen in many ways, sometimes we don't look back and see how we can continue to evolve and get better, and hear the insights from our candidates and from our hiring managers. So I think that's something that we're continuing to work at here at Blink. And then the other part to that is, as recruiters, we hear that we want to find like this perfect candidate, right? And we don't look at the other candidates or outside of that bubble. So I think just letting go of that perfect candidate, it does not exist, and I'm just gonna say it. I think we have to embrace the imperfectionism in terms of finding candidates outside of our little bubble to continue to help us innovate, our space. So that's just something that I want to add, for everyone here who might be in the recruiting space, like just go out there and educate your leaders and the rest of your recruiting team that there's no such thing as a perfect candidate. I think the imperfection is what's so amazing, and it might put us at the edge of our chair sometimes, but that's what we want in an organization where people can bring in some sort of a point of view, and they're imperfect but perfect in a way because there was a gap that we saw and that we needed that, in an organization. So there are a lot of ways to capture all of that. Just don't look out for that perfect candidate. So, and continue to evolve your recruiting process. Don't make it one that will last for 20 years, and keep to that. Continue to hear your feedback from your candidates, your hiring committee, and bring those insights to continue to perfect your process.
Yeah. That definitely feels related to what both Elodie and Kathy were saying about kind of safe space and wanting to make sure that folks feel like they have room to not be perfect and not be the expert. And Kathy, you were kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious to hear more about like this idea of like creating safe spaces where we can be human, be our whole selves. Like, what does that mean to y'all, and how have you seen that play out at Blink or within this work? Elodie, I know you had some thoughts on that. I'd be curious to hear about that from you.
Yeah, really quick, I wanted to jump back to a small thing that you mentioned earlier. You used the language call in, and that's something that has also been top of mind for me a lot lately. Being able to call people in rather than calling people out. I think we have this culture sometimes of calling people out on something, on a mistake people make. And so it also makes people not want to, it like leads to inaction because you're afraid of being called out or canceled. And so this small tweak in the language and like in part of that creating the safe space is calling people in and inviting people in with openness, without shaming anyone for making a mistake. I think it's creating that culture that mistakes are okay, and really bringing people into the conversation rather than like talking at them.
Yeah, I think just to add to that and kind of speak to what you were saying earlier, Alexi, I feel like imperfection is like what actually invites conversation. I remember, I think one of the first things I learned about like design and, concept testing and things is if you show something that looks too final to someone, they're going to fear like being able to actually provide feedback on it because it's too finished. And I think, similarly in research, I think one of the tendencies you have as a researcher is to not show all the messiness between data collection and actually reporting on your insights. You want to show this like perfect product, but what actually is really interesting is all the conversations that come from those in-process conversations, like being able to show a rough draft of the themes that you're seeing early on, being able to show even just an outline of a report, being able to show just some pieces of information of where your mind is at, even if it's not perfect. That's what actually invites conversation in a client-facing role and in projects. So kind of to your point, being basically perfectionism is what kind of hinders progress and what hinders being able to kind of improve and have these good discussions.
Yeah. I'm seeing some great questions in the chat. So I think I don't want to cut anybody off if you have like some additional thoughts to share, but perhaps we could look at some of those. Thanks. One of them I see, I admit I don't have the answer to, but I'm very curious to hear y'all's thoughts on how do you answer the politics don't belong at work response to DEI efforts in the workplace? Have any of you, so we're very fortunate at Blink that we had a pretty supportive culture. As I mentioned, our subcommittee, we were already regularly in the habit of what we were calling employee forums, which is kind of like these safe space to talk about just different things that come up for us. Like definitely during the first part of COVID, there was a lot of just like, we don't really know what's happening. How's everybody doing? Kind of check in. And then they certainly over the summer of 2020, during the racial reckoning that was happening in the aftermath of George Floyd and some other deaths of Black Americans, it sort of took this turn of like that became the focus and what a lot of folks were thinking of. And so all that to say, we're very fortunate that Blink was kind of already a pretty supportive space. Not to say that we didn't have to still convince leadership to sort of like make an official committee or to let us do the work. So I admit that I haven't had to consider, what if somebody says politics don't belong at work? To me, this is like, it's not politics, but like how to get more specific, I don't know. What do you guys think?
For me, I so appreciate that frank question, because I think it's always there, and just with the environment and news and different kind of workplace environment that we're all having to deal with, whether it's hybrid, in person, completely virtual. For me personally, I feel like I'm just genuinely curious when someone doesn't think like me, or like I'd like to ask my questions coming from a place of really wanting to understand, and know like, oh, where is this coming from? And hopefully in a totally non-threatening way, to be able to have that conversation, like truly have that dialogue, versus it being conflict or something that has to be uncomfortable, and that kind of thing. I appreciate, I like when people have different ideas. I like when I even more like having that dialogue and just being able to have that. Again, we've been talking a lot about safe space and stuff, and that's one of the things I think I appreciate the most in the culture that we have at Blink, is that it is very supportive of asking questions and being open, and really allowing each individual to bring their self to work, is truly, I mean, you hear that all the time in like lots of different workplace marketing material and stuff, but Blink is one place that I feel like it's true, it's there, it's active, and really, really supported up and down the organization and across.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like you might sort of like answer that with like, tell me more, and wanting to find out like, what is it that you mean politics don't belong at work?
Right. Yeah, definitely.
have a conversation about it. And anybody else have thoughts on that?
I think we're all humans and we're allowed to feel things. And adding to what Kathy said, Blink has such a transparent and supportive environment. So regardless of, the different topics, or, we're allowed to feel something and have a conversation and be curious. And I think that's what's fascinating and feels good about being here, that we're okay to feel something about a certain topic and what's going out in the world, or, and have a conversation or in the world or within the organization. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I'd probably just ask, like, what's political about wanting to ensure that, whether it's the employees within your company or the folks that you're talking to in research, like, what's political about wanting to include a spot for everybody at the table, and to make sure that it's a diverse group, instead of just like one kind of way of thinking or one POV that's represented. I might just kind of start the conversation by asking that, framing it as like, what's political about wanting to include more voices and more perspectives. But yeah, I understand that not every workplace necessarily supports open, honest conversations like that. So that's a really interesting question.
I definitely agree with what everyone's saying. I think there's definitely a component of just inviting in curiosity. I think it's also, also want to recognize that's a big uphill battle sometimes, and that does take a lot of work. And you have your normal day job, and then also having to teach or convince, or it's a lot of work, and like recognizing that, and some of these things sometimes maybe just start a little bit more grassroots, and maybe it's finding your allies and coworkers who create that safe space with you. And maybe it's not an organized thing, and maybe it's just starting small. It doesn't have to be something super formal to get going, and just being able to find the people around you that you feel like you can have these conversations with, and starting something on your own, and maybe down the line it turns into something more formal. All of these can exist, and all these efforts can exist at the same time, and sometimes it might just have to be finding what's the easiest path and the path of least resistance just to get started.
Yeah. When you were talking, I thought of a couple other things. One of which is totally, like you were saying, it can be an uphill battle. And like, I think it's important to recognize, if you don't have that bandwidth to fight that fight or to do that work all the time, like just giving yourself grace for that. And then second, just some other ways of thinking about it is like, there's a business case for DEI. I don't have an article specifically on this ready to share, but certainly having diverse folks within a more diverse workplace, and having more perspectives in the mix is good for business. You will, and Neha, I don't know if you probably don't have stats ready, but like, I'm sure you can speak from a perspective of like having employees, people who are sticking to work somewhere, are looking to work at places that value DEI. I think more and more it's almost becoming a requirement for businesses now. So like, not only is it like, it might be quote unquote good politics, but it's also just good for business. So, oh, and then the other thing I was going to say is the other way that it's kind of good for business is some of the reading that we did was around the curb cut effect and targeted universalism, which is this idea that disability activists in the 90s worked on getting the curb cuts in the like in the sidewalks where it's sort of like becomes even with the street. So initially those didn't exist, and they were championed by disability activists, but those help people who are not only using wheelchairs, but also people using strollers or people on roller skates or other kinds of folks. So there's work that may be done that is specifically to be inclusive design, but it makes things better for everybody. So that's kind of another way that that like inclusivity or DEI is good for business.
And just to add to that, Alexi, I think that needs to start right in the beginning with hiring. So, if we are bringing in diverse candidates, that would lead to a bigger innovation in an organization and with our clients. So that's, I would ask, it's very important for recruiting to partner with their hiring managers and learn like the larger objectives of within their team and their group and what they're looking for. So I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I did see, I think there was a question to share the vision and principles again, so I brought that up. I can also bring up a slide in a minute that has some of the readings that we has links to some of the readings that we did. So I'll just like pause here, and I can't see now the panelists' faces because I'm sharing the screen. So
there is something, a question we got early on I wanted to make sure we touched on, and I'm not sure I'll be interpreting this correctly, but it's written as, what do you guys do, particularly now, to keep up with the work? What does a typical day or conversation look like? And yeah, that's a hard one that I know I personally grapple with every day. And I know we've had similar conversations in our subcommittee about just this, like, how do we keep up with this? How can we do our, so-called day job and what we're paid for, but make room for this, what we feel so passionate and feel like is an integral part of our day-to-day work, amongst all the different meetings and deadlines and such. And, at the end of the day, it's like, I felt like it was a pretty stark answer of like, you kind of have to make the time. Like, we're choosing to make the time. And it's okay if not everyone can, not everyone has that availability, work-life balance and all of that. But yeah, it's a tough one. And, I'll be honest, I know I don't always make the time, but I do try. I am more successful in it some days more than others, but yeah, it's a conscious decision that I think we need to make. You choose to make room for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's all rings true to me, and just on a like practical level, what I'll say is currently, like in terms of our sort of day-to-day, if you will, our subcommittee meets once a week, and again, we sort of do have to try to, even though we've got that meeting on our calendars, sometimes we have a client final presentation or another meeting that might mean that we can't attend every week, but we do our best to meet on a weekly basis as a subcommittee. And then we've got broader committee meetings that we make space for once a month. And then, we have different forums and things. So just on a practical level, we're trying to meet once a week to work on that framework that I showed before. And we're not quite done, let's say, but we've made a lot of progress in the last couple of weeks that I'm pretty excited about. So that's kind of like the practical level is just like any other project. It's a lot of meetings and discussing and seeing how we can implement. And here I've just I have the slide up for some of those readings if folks are interested. Any other thoughts on the day-to-day or how we're keeping up with this work?
Yeah, I wanted to add one more thought to that. I think now, after meeting with Sloan and thinking about how we want to approach this work, it sounds like we have this whole systematic process in place and we kind of know what we're doing. But I do want to not forget, and I do want to highlight that before we got to that point, when we were still working on getting buy-in from leadership, when we were still trying to figure out how we wanted to even come up with the framework and show it to the rest of the people at Blink, there were a lot of meetings that we had where we had no agenda and we just met and talked about what was top of mind for us.
Mm-hmm.
And while that feels so like counterintuitive, like you're not actually making progress, I will say those meetings, even though it was like 30 minutes of time away from client work or from other things we could be doing, those meetings were energizing. And like, I personally feel like they fed me energy that helped me do other work. And so even though it's 30 minutes of time that, looks the same, it's like the same calendar block as maybe another meeting, to me, that 30 minutes was so much better time spent than just 30 more minutes of client work. So I wanted to highlight that even if you don't have things all figured out, just having 30 minutes to talk about what's top of mind, it's pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and our monthly committee meetings, where all of the subcommittee members and it's kind of the broader team, it always starts with like, just what have you been reading? Have you learned anything? Did you experience anything? Like just making space to talk about, like you said, Tulsi, what's top of mind, and sharing what we've got going on, whether it's a specific project that we're working on that might have a DEI component, or if it's a podcast that we listen to or an article that we read. I think that can be really a great starting point, is just like do some reading, do some reading, think about it, talk about it, share what you learn.
I think the way I put it into practice every day with my team, we talk about inclusion and creating a sense of belonging. It's not just creating bringing in a diverse pipeline of candidates. And how I practice it is just, I meet with my team every end of the day, 15 minutes, no agenda. Just doing a temperature check and how are they feeling? How's their day going? And, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's part of who we are. We're humans. And I think that just brings a sense of belonging and trust within a team. So, it's a day-to-day practice for me. And I think that's really important. And that's what really keeps our team inclusive and builds that trust. So.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, I really have appreciated this conversation, and yeah, we've got like 2 minutes left. Any final thoughts before we wrap? All right, and I'm gonna try to share my email address in, let's see. I was going to try to do it in the chat. I don't know if I can figure that out, but yes, we definitely encourage, if you have if you're working on this type of work within your company, if you're currently doing that, or if you want to do that and you're not sure where to start, we don't know everything, obviously, but we know some things and we want to talk to you and hear from you. So my name's Alexi. My email is alexi.glines@blinkux. I put it up on the slide. And if you're interested in working with Blink, we'd love to hear from you as well. So you can reach out to Neha if you're interested. So I'd like to thank everybody again for participating, asking really insightful, interesting questions. I hope you got as much out of it as we got out of it today. And thank you, Minge, for sponsoring this event.
Thank you, and congratulations for a great panel.
All right. Thank you, Patricia.
Have a good evening.
Good evening.
Bye.